Okay, let's look at some examples here. Air and water have a high degree of utility, and although essential to life, can hardly be considered scarce. We have it all the time. So you can't, in other words, say, well, I got lots of air. You might make the argument for water, but generally speaking, air and water, there's lots of it. It's not going to increase your value. However, if water in itself is going to apply to some kind of development, then water might be a utility that's scarce. So now then you may say, well, forget about the air, but the utility now is the water. It's scarce, so there's a demand for it. So maybe we should go into water. To satisfy the aspects of scarcity, the object must be present in limited amounts to have value. Again, just what I said, we're not going to say air. There's air everywhere. It has no value. It's not going to increase anything. The demand must be effective. That is, people must both want the object and also have the ability to buy it. It's okay to have $1 million piece of property, but if no one has $1 million to buy it, is it worth $1 million? Okay, causes of value. Value is market determined, as we spoke about. It's what someone is willing to pay. And this gives rise to two categories of value. Value in exchange. This is primarily the result of the interaction of forces of supply and demand. That's low supply, high demand, big value. High supply, low demand, low value. Okay? Value in use is the result of productivity, which is another principle. I'm not going to go through all this. You don't have to be an appraiser. Just to give you an idea of what value in exchange is. Value in use is the amount of money the owner of rights of property must be offered or paid. In other words, if you don't offer me enough money, I'm not going to sell it to you. That's all that means. This is what's more important, I find, for like what your responsibility would be as a committee to review appraisals or request appraisals. Know what market value is. It's the highest amount paid for a price of property and on an open market with a willing buyer, a willing seller, under no duress. So in other words, don't, you know that whole thing we talked about last time? Sometimes the deal sounds so good and you get yourself so involved in it, pretty soon you kind of lose sight of your bottom line and you just want to make the deal. That happens too and will dictate market value. If you have a lot of those going on, it drives your market value down. So you don't want to do that. When you're negotiating, you want to get a middle line. This is where it's at. Our recommendations will be based on these principles. One is never go less than your market value. So don't get yourself in positions where you're so stressed to make a deal, because then you make bad deals. Market value is still just the estimate of value. It doesn't change. It's value. It's the most important value concept in the real estate is market value. Now, price, on the other hand, is something different. That's what's historically paid. Like, it's already actually happened. There's a price. Price and value are two very different things. And people tend to get them mixed up sometimes. Value is your value of member to land. Price is only what somebody is actually going to pay or has paid for it. It's happened already. It's just a fact. Forces of value, these are the things to consider: social, economic, political, and physical. This primarily is for all value systems, but really for us, because we have limited lands is these forces have greater impact, I find, on reserve land. We can't just go out and keep adding to our reserve unless we have a big fight and huge processes. So these forces are really important to consider when we're doing development, be it for our own members or lessees or whatever. It's really, really important to look at the social impacts, economic impacts, political impacts, and physical impacts. Physical meaning like the physical land, what's happening to it. Economic, of course, is it going to increase jobs or is it going to deplete jobs? And your social is gambling is a big social impact. So it's not that you don't have it, is you think of it like here, you logically and strategically placed it, where you have all the commercial area in one, and you don't have VLTs in the middle of a housing development. It's very important. I just thought to give you an idea, here's some of the principles of real estate and how you would look at appraising. Like there's tons. So appraisers learn all these, they learn the impacts of them, when to use them, when not to use them. There is a high degree of relationship with the interdependence that exists among the principles, since they are concerned with the behavior of many overlapping economical and social forces. So there is a reason why there are many principles that apply in appraising or determining value at different times. It's to have the knowledge and ability to know when to apply them. That's why we have appraisers. These principles are not just academic theories, but keys to understanding why, what, and how certain things happen. And again, it's not a formula. That's why nobody could foresee the market crash in mortgages. It's not. Sometimes everything just goes to poop. An understanding of these principles is essential to the proper application of the various techniques and procedures of valuation. So they all have their place. Now, I just thought this may be useful for you as a committee, because if you do ever assist council to provide recommendation, or if you're reviewing an appraisal, there's 7 basic steps. This also helps in developing a terms of reference, or providing recommendation for it. First of all, you have to define the problem, or what is it that you need appraised, and for what reason. Then you have the preliminary survey, and the appraisal plan will come out of that. Then the data collected, and then it's analyzed. Now, collecting the data, if you leave it up to the appraiser to collect it all, that's costly because that's the time. The First Nation has a lot of the information, will have all the information relevant to the direct area on the reserve, and then that just leaves the appraiser to have to look off for comparables. So that really assists the process when the First Nation can just provide the information on reserve. The next is there's 3 main approaches for appraising, and that's your cost approach, income approach, and your direct comparison approach. So it depends. If it's an apartment building, then it's an income approach because it's an income generating, there's units in there. So it's a whole different value system. If it's a cost approach, that's based on cost of building. That's usually how we do it, is cost approach, because in most cases it's our development company that's going to do something. In other cases it's a developer. You'd still base it on cost. Direct comparison is if you're replacing something. You compare exactly to something out there, like if you had an apartment building that burnt down, say, they'd find one similar, find out the cost of construction. And then it's just a direct comparison from one building to the other. Then you have the reconciliation of value indications and the preparation of the final estimate. Usually the appraiser will spell it out right in the last paragraph. And so if you ever have to review an appraisal or help develop terms of reference, go back to this, because this will help you in the process to lay out the terms of reference, what you're expecting. Key thing you want on it is signed and sealed. Never pay the appraiser until it's signed and sealed, because they're bound by law then to defend the value. And here are things that you should have in the report. Here's your follow-up, the adequate description, which the band could give them. The purpose of the appraisal. Is this to replace something? Do we want market value? Do we want highest and best use only? So this is where, when you're doing the terms of reference, this is the more nitty-gritty part to it. You've got to tell them what you want. The effective date, important. Always have the highest and best use statement, always. And all the support the value conclusions together with such data that's necessary. So if there's something significant, that appraiser should have it, okay? And it should form an appendices to the actual appraisal report. Then the final estimate, if there's any special or limiting conditions. And then, of course, certification and signature. You be careful what you ask for, and here's a really good example. Do you want a form report, a letter of opinion, or do you want a full narrative report? The difference between the form report and the full narrative report is probably about $6,000. So be careful what you ask for on a large development. A full narrative report on a big development, $5,000 to $7,000. It's probably about this thick too, and it's well worth it. And every time you're starting a big development or any large investment you're putting into anything, get a full narrative report. Bite the bullet, spend the money, get it, because from then on, you won't have to do another one. Not even if you're doing rent reviews, and that all they do then, they'll do a letter of opinion, which might cost you $250 to $500. But you have to have something good to start with, okay? But don't, if you just want like a form letter or letter of opinion, please don't ask for a full narrative report, and that has happened. Terms of reference for appraisers will differ according to the purpose of your appraisal and the degree of liaison needed. That's why I say to keep costs down, please have a package ready, because you can get all the information you need off the Indian Land Registry. You can get all the maps. If anything has been exchanged on the reserve, trading houses, buying houses from each other, businesses, you have that information. It would take him or her twice as long to research it than it would if you just handed them the information. There are very different purposes for developing a terms of reference. We've talked about this, your actual negotiations. Rent reviews are a big one. The other one is appraisers for specific land claims. That one has been used a lot. I've been involved in quite a few of these type when they're trying to get settlement on lands that were taken, or you need a full narrative report because you're negotiating the true value of that property, either to get it in cash or equal value lands back, or those particular lands if they haven't been contaminated. Remember, quite often in the past they used First Nation lands to put railways on or shipyards or things like that, and they're highly contaminated. And then they'll say, okay, you can have the lands back. You can't use the lands, you're left with the mess. And then now later in years, First Nations are negotiating those lands right out of their reserves and getting other lands back instead. Okay, that is my extremely short version